Please welcome to the stage Adobe Generative AI and Sensei VP Alexandru Costin and Creative Artists Agency Chief Legal Officer Hilary Krane with Bloomberg's Rachel Metz.
Hello, thank you. Good morning. Good morning to you guys. Thank you both so much for being here. We've got a lot to talk about. AI and artists, and there's just so much happening there. AI has long been used by artists, and it's gotten easier and cheaper and more widespread with systems like Stable Diffusion and DALL-E and ChatGPT, Adobe's Firefly, which I know you've been working on, and so on. So what are some of the most interesting uses that the two of you are seeing for generative AI in creating art?
Well, I think there's tons of examples. AI, like many things before, is just a new tool for the creative community. And the creative community is very adept at taking on new tools and applying human creativity to get new art forms. One interesting thing we've seen in just the past couple of weeks is there's going to be a release of a new Beatles song. There was a tape of John Lennon's voice where the quality was very poor, and he and his family said, no, we can't make a song out of it. And AI has now been able to clean that up to make it of high enough quality that Paul McCartney, with the consent of the family, is going to release the first new Beatles song in decades. They released others in '95, but the technology wasn't good enough for this one. That's a fantastic application of the tool. We also see it being used in post-production in order to make a lot of things easier that were harder before. You can do a lot of things without the presence of the talent by using scans, and that's going to be another fantastic application, and it's gonna, the sky's the limit. I think we're only beginning to scratch the surface on where the creativity will lead us.
And Alexandru, what kinds of things are you seeing?
Same in our world. When we look at the spectrum of art and creativity in general, starting from fine arts to consumer content creation, the two biggest uses we've seen, recently we launched generative fill in Photoshop for photo retouching, and this took off like one of our most successful betas. So a lot of actual production workflows and content creation workflows for professionals are being helped by generative AI in new ways. And we're also enabling some of that technology for consumers and communicators that don't have the skills to actually create. And we're seeing an actual explosion of creativity at that consumer side, folks that have ideas, but in the past they weren't able to express themselves. Now with the help of generative AI directly integrated in our workflows, they're able to create content and have a differentiated social presence or just communicate with their families, etc.
And Alexandru, you also have a lot of people that are using Firefly that are, as you mentioned, are doing work-related projects with it. Like, what are some things that people are doing with it that you might not have expected?
So we're still in beta, so our general availability release is happening very soon. So everybody's still experimenting on the Firefly website, but we've seen a lot of viral activity with people extending out Beatles album covers, for example. This was something we didn't expect to be as popular and viral, or mixing memes together. Yeah. This is like really, really crazy stuff. And again, this is just human creativity at its best when they come up with new ideas and technology just enables this new wave of creativity.
What are some of the concerns that the two of you have about the use of generative AI in the art world, like ethical concerns, particularly around how data is collected to train systems that can generate text or images? This stuff is typically collected from all over the internet, but increasingly some people, such as artists in particular, whose work may have been sort of hoovered up as part of a data set, are upset about that.
Yeah, well, I think you're seeing, I mean, we've already seen the lawsuits. I think Getty Images is the best one. People challenging the practice of on what material you train the machines and the ethics behind what's used to train the machines. Mm-hmm. There is a difference between publicly available and legally available for your use to make money. And the whole intellectual property regime gives rights to certain individual creators and people who appear. And when a machine is trained for a commercial purpose using those rights without their permission, I think you're at serious risk. I think if we think about an actor and how important the creative decisions are that they make, not just when they're doing a role, but as to what roles they agree to do in order to create their whole body of work, that's a real curatorial expression of self. And if other people can take that away from them by using their image and without their consent, using either their prior creative thoughts in the form of a writer or their image or their voice for a musician in order to make a product that they're unaware of or haven't consented to be in, I think we're in very murky, or even not that murky, pretty black and white ethical land where we have to think about how do we create the rules and the norms around use of these creative individuals' work in a way that respects their rights and doesn't do violence. We heard a lot of talk this morning about threatening of humanity, and obviously human extinction is kind of an important big deal. I get it. But along the way, we shouldn't only think about human extinction. We should think about mapping basic ethics and norms onto this fantastically creative and powerful tool.
And this was top of mind for us too when we designed Firefly, because artists were indeed up in arms about the fact that their public content was used without their consent, compensation, or control. So when we designed Firefly, we actually decided to train only on data we had in Adobe stock and public available data with copyrights expired. And on purpose, we don't include any recognizable character, we don't include any IP, trademarks. So by the nature of the training data, not only we're respectful with our customers, because these artists are basically all of them our customers, but we're also enabling enterprises and creators of content, generative content, to be comfortable using this content, because the risk of generating by mistake or somebody else's IP or recognizable character is zero.
So, Alexandru, I have a question for you related to that, because Adobe recently said that business users of Firefly can get an IP indemnity from Adobe, which essentially, as I understand it, means that if a business customer is sued over some media that it makes with Firefly, let's say an ad, hypothetically, Adobe will pick up the legal tab, right?
That's basically it. And again, our comfort comes from the fact that we train on data we control, and that's curated both using AI, but more importantly, is curated using human curators, and we make sure we don't leak any IP in it. So this is why we have this comfort for our enterprise customers, and for cases where they actually, it's just for the generated content. If they remix it with potentially infringing content, in that case, the IP indemnity doesn't apply. But for pure content generated by Firefly, we are offering this IP indemnity to enterprise customers.
Yeah, I think it's fantastically interesting and pioneering work. The idea of ethical training, I hope, becomes part of the greater lexicon, and that's what's happening here. And it's important for the corporate and business clients who have that indemnity. But we were also talking about the democratization of creativity and allowing somebody like me who lacks it to have the tools to perhaps create things. I don't want to be stealing somebody else's work as I'm exploring my creativity for the first time. And so having tools and mechanisms that would give me or every other creator the confidence that when they're diving in to this world for the first time, they're not doing it in a way that's doing violence to other creative people who've invested their lifetime in the work, I think is super important, and I really commend Adobe for what they've done.
Thank you.
I'm curious, though, what did Adobe's lawyers think of that? And Hilary, as a lawyer yourself, maybe you've got some thoughts on that.
I mean, Dana Rao, our chief legal officer, would be a better person to enter this, but they're fully behind this. And for a long time, actually, we've been pioneering many other innovative things in the context of generative content, like the content authenticity initiatives that I want to touch upon later on. But we do have, again, our legal department full support, and because they know how we train. They're deeply involved. Our legal department runs what's called our AI ethics program. So we have a program we've set up many years ago in 2020 when we started pioneering generative AI using GANs, which is a different type of model with neural filters in Photoshop. We had our legal department full engagement, so we've created this AI ethics department that helped us navigate all of those, not only training data issues, but also bias and harm reduction initiatives, et cetera. So we do have a long history of investing thoughtfully in this space.
Okay. Hilary, I have a question for you specifically about some stuff that's going on right now in Hollywood. Earlier this month, the biggest union in Hollywood, the SAG-AFTRA Actors Union, began negotiating with studios regarding a new 3-year contract. One of the issues they're discussing is the use of AI to do things like mimic users' voices or their bodies. So I'm curious, like, how you envision generative AI changing Hollywood, and who stands to benefit and who stands to get hurt from this?
Well, I think that's a question that remains unanswered, and I'm not myself involved in the Guild conversations. I hasten to point out it's not only the Screen Actors Guild, the Directors Guild reached an agreement with the studios on AI.
Okay.
And the Writers Guild is also in the mix. And I think we're going to have to wait to see what all of those negotiations yield. But in the end, I'll go back to where I started. As a tool for creativity, I think we're going to see an explosion of content in Hollywood that could be good for Hollywood, but only if we pay attention to establishing the ethical norms and creating a world in which, before the law or legislation can catch up, the genie is let out of the bottle because it is normalized to steal the content that's available but not legally available for use. And thus, I think we're in a little bit of a time race to get to the ethical standards to make sure that this tool in the end delivers on the creative promise of it, both for the amateur, but all the way up through the chain of Hollywood.
One more thing I wanted to ask you about related to actors and to contracts and stuff. I'm curious if you're seeing AI, the applications of generative AI being discussed or put into film contracts. And if so, how? And what kind of questions does this bring up for artists protecting their images?
Well, so, you know, generative AI is new, but the idea of special effects is not new.
Yeah.
And the ability to manipulate images to change them post-production has existed for a long period of time, so we have some precedent here. Okay. And it is pretty well established that the studios seek consent from the artist before they will fundamentally change their performance. I'm going to forget the actor, but there was an example of 2 decades ago where they added a tear to an actor's performance that he didn't approve of. And when he saw the film and he had a tear, he was like, how'd that happen? And this conversation started that long ago, and it's continuing. There is a question of who owns the character? Who owns the digital image of the actor who creates the character? What control should that actor have over use of those tools in the future, both in respect to the piece of art that they've agreed to make and with respect to other pieces of art? I think ultimately we're going to get to a comfortable place with the studios because the studios and artists are in a symbiotic relationship. More concerning is those who are not part of the mainstream but who want to jump in by creating work they now have the ability to create at much lower cost because of the availability of machines that have potentially been trained on the pilfered content. That's a real problem.
Let's talk a little bit about audience awareness. This is something I think about whenever I see a trailer that might use AI in a certain way, or I've seen some commercials that are using AI. When should the audience be made aware when AI is part of the creative process? Why and why not? And Alexandru, I know Firefly does some embedded details to mark AI-generated images, but I'm not sure how that translates to like a final product.
Yeah, so for a long time, as we were pioneering those generative work, we were receiving this media attention and industry feedback that we need to invest in content authenticity. We need to basically help content consumers understand whether a piece of content was digitally edited, and in this case, more recently, fully generated synthetically. And 4 years ago, our legal department at the NRA, we pioneered the creation of the Content Authenticity Initiative, which is a consortium that has 1,000 members now, starting from camera manufacturers like Qualcomm and others, and ending up with websites and content consumption places. And across the stack, we're encouraging and the implementation of a nutrition label, digital nutrition label, which we call content credentials, that is a piece of information that describes what modifications were brought to that content, and that's embedded cryptographically in the content itself. So that means that somebody consuming a piece of content with content credentials embedded, they should be able to read the nutrition label. They should be able to understand, is this piece of content real, or is it generated or edited so it doesn't represent the original intent? And this is extremely important in this age where it's so easy to create this content. Imagine the implications of deepfakes in politics. And I mean, this is a really serious issue, and this is why we're encouraging a lot of our partners we're working with generative companies like Stability AI and Spawning.ai and others to standardize on this content credentials initiatives, content authenticity initiatives, so consumers of content have the option to first verify and then trust the piece of content. Today, you see a photo, it looks real, you implicitly believe it out of immediately. But in reality, in this new future where all content will be modified digitally or generated fully, we need to enable content to embed this authenticity information so consumers can have the right of understanding and then verifying and then trusting that piece of information.
I agree with all of that, and I believe that some form of watermarking or otherwise, being able to trace the provenance of a piece of art back to the consent of the artists who are included should be a part of this kind of nutrition label. And the reason I go for a watermark is because it's not just as you're watching the whole content. As we know, somebody can take a clip of that may or may not have the nutrition label, put it on a platform, and it can be around the world before the artist even knows it's happened to them. But if we can embed something that'll pop, that'll show not okay or okay, that's part of the solution. Are we there yet technologically? I don't think so, but with the smart guys sitting next to me working on it and others, and if we take them at the word, the leaders we heard from this couch this morning, I think that we can do a lot to create these tools that'll make it a much safer environment.
Right. Thank you both so much for talking to me about this. It was wonderful to have you here. Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause.